Jackie Granith sent me a recording of this song and said, "Can you do this for our Holocaust program?" And I said, "Sure." And thank you. And so when I listened to it and I was searching for the music, I said, I must have this. I know I must have this. And it turns out I did. I have it in Yiddish and in English. And one of the things that this text makes me think about, and I'm going to share it with you before I sing it. The text reads, "Tell me, where can I go? Seems that every door is closed to me. The Jew is persecuted at every turn. There is no room for him or her." And it made me think of this experience that I had in Berlin. In my first year of cantorial school, I was in Israel, and we took a trip to Berlin for a special conference called Tamar, which is a gathering of lots of young Jewish professionals, many from the Soviet Union. And we walked through the streets and we came to the Holocaust Memorial. And it really makes you, it feels like you are in a maze. And I got lost in the middle of this maze. And that feeling is the feeling that I imagine my great aunt had when she was living in Nazi Europe. And so this is in honor of her. She's still living today in Yerushalayim. Nicht sicher ist vor ihm jeder Tag. Sein Leben ist eine finstere Nacht. Seine Streben als vor ihm ist Format. Verlassen, Leus mit Sonne keine Freude, keine Hoffnung, ohne sicheren Hand. Wohin soll ich gehen? Wer konnt wären mir? Wohin soll ich gehen? Als verschlossen jede Tür, sie ist die Welt groß genug. Noch ist mir ist unklein, wie ein Blick muss zurück, sie ist so stellt jede Brick, wie ein soll ich gehen? Tell me, where can I go? There's no place I can see. Where to go, where to go? Every door is closed for me. To the left, to the right, it's the same in every land. There is nowhere to go, and it's me who should know. Won't you please understand? Now I know where to go, where my folks proudly stand. Let me go, let me go. that precious promised land. No more left, no more right. Lift your head and see the light. I am proud, can't you see? For at last I am free. No more wandering for me. And we have a very, very special treat for you all. It's my pleasure and my honor to invite to the stage Sydney Levy.
Hi, my name is Sydney Levy. I am the great-granddaughter of Adele Roche, who escaped from Poland with a few of her older siblings. She was the youngest of 9, and the rest of her family who stayed behind perished in the Holocaust. I am so thankful to her for creating L'Adore Vador, generations from generations. I hope our generations continue just as these words in this poem I will sing. Eli, Eli, shelo yigamer leolam, achol v'chayam, rishu shel hamayim, berak hashamayim, tfilat hadam, achol v'chayam, rishu shel hamayim, berak hashamayim, tfilat hadam. O God, my God, I pray that these things never end. The sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart, the sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart. Achol v'chayam, rishu shel hamayim, berak hashamayim, tfilat hadam.
Thank you so much. George Richfeld is both a child survivor and a child of survivors. George was born in Poland and spent the Holocaust in Poland. George is also responsible for sending me the song that the cantor sang and the poem that's on the back of your program that we will recite later. And he's my good friend.
Good afternoon, everybody. Where do I begin? In 1939, Poland had the largest Jewish population, 3 million Jewish folks. 91% of those were murdered. So I represent the 9% that survived. Again, my name is George Richfeld, and I'm a child Holocaust survivor. So the difference between me and a lot of survivors that are still alive today is I was too young to be put into a death camp, and I was too young to fight. Now, before I continue, I would like to throw out a little question to you guys here. Everybody here, as I am a parent and I am a grandfather as well, I'm sure there are parents and grandparents in the audience as well. My parents had to make a decision, and the decision was save the child. Now, I'm sure you've all seen Sophie's Choice, where she had to make a choice. Well, my parents had to make a similar choice, but the choice that they had to make was to save me instead of saving themselves. So I really honor today, and every time I speak, I honor my parents, and I also honor a family by the name of Frunskevich. Now, the Frunskeviches were righteous Gentiles. Okay, I don't think I have to describe or explain to you what righteous means or the word Gentile either, not in this audience. Okay, so the righteous Gentiles that saved thousands of Jewish lives, I'm one of the recipients of that. The righteous Gentiles that I honor worked for my father, as a matter of fact. My father had a fur factory, and he was very successful. And Mr. Frunskevich, who I ultimately called Papa, was his foreman. And then there was a daughter, Helinka, or Helen, and then there was a wife. I ultimately called them Mama and Papa. So when I was born, and I fled with my parents to Vilna, where my mother's parents were, my grandparents and her sister, which is, I don't remember that because obviously I was too young. But my parents told me that when they arrived in Vilna, things were not that bad, okay? But surely and slowly, they got worse and worse and worse. And for you historians out there, you know that the Vilna Ghetto started in 1941, okay? Well, during that whole time, when I was in Vilna with my grandparents, there was an arrangement being made. And the arrangement was to save the child. Now, how are they going to do that? Well, the only way to get that child saved is to get him out of the Vilna Ghetto, which ultimately became the Vilna Ghetto. So I'm told that I was thrown over a barbed wire fence into the arms of Helinka and her boyfriend. And then she whisked me off to their apartment in Warsaw. Okay? Now, her boyfriend ultimately was murdered by the Nazis, and Papa Frunskevich and Mama Frunskevich survived, and Helinka survived, and I survived with them in that apartment. So just to give you, because I know time is of the essence here today, just to give you a few little tidbits. The time in the Vilna Ghetto was also horrific for my parents because they told me that my aunt was walking in the street one day. She was carrying my cousin, her 9-month-old child, and a Nazi came up to her and started to get fresh with her and put his hands on her, and she ultimately turned around and slapped him, and he pulled out his revolver and put a bullet in her head and put a bullet in the baby's head and left them lying in the street and walked away. So I never got a chance to meet my aunt. I never got a chance to meet my cousin. Ultimately, my uncle was sent to Auschwitz and murdered in Auschwitz. My grandparents, who I never got a chance to meet because I was too young, put into a mass grave and shot. When I lived with the Frunskeviches, I constantly asked for Mommy and Daddy. Where's Mommy and Daddy? Why can't I be with Mommy and Daddy? And they kept constantly telling me, everything's going to be okay, don't worry, they'll be with you soon. So I got comfortable. And we had some harrowing experiences during that time, which I'll share a few with you right now. We went out into the street one day. They would take me out for walks at night so I could get some air. And I always went out with Helinka. And one day we came upon a Nazi patrol, and the Nazi jumped out of his vehicle and he started to flirt with Helinka, blonde, blue-eyed, very pretty, very attractive. And I can feel it today. He pinched me on the cheek and, where's your mother? Where's your father? And I said, in a broken Polish, because I was still learning how to speak, and I was just running around as any child would, and as my words were slurred, and I said, she's in the ghetto, because that's where they told me she was. Well, that was instant death. But the way it came out as if she's laying in the mud somewhere. And he thought I was a big comedian. He pinched me on the cheek, reached into his vehicle, and gave me an apple and told us to keep walking. We got lucky. One particular day, Mama Frunskevich and I are in the apartment. Papa Frunskevich and Helinka would go to work for the Nazis to survive. And Mama Frunskevich said to me, I'm going to get some food. So I'm not taking you with me, but you stay here, and no matter what happens, if anybody comes to the door, you don't open the door, even if it's your father. Now, guys, my wife is sitting right here, and she'll attest to the fact that I believe in women's intuition. And I think that's when subconsciously I learned about women's intuition. Because why would she say, even if it's your father? Because I'm sure she knew that, or felt that he was dead and that my mother was dead, all right? Because the Vilna Ghetto was disbanded in 43 and 95% of the people were murdered. So, okay, I'm in the apartment, and now, I didn't have a Nintendo game to play with. I didn't have an iPad to play with. I didn't have an iPhone to play with, right? I didn't have any kind of games. I didn't have a TV. So what do? So there was a window in my room, and I decided to kill Nazis. So I sat at the window, and with this finger, I then shot Nazis. And as I'm shooting these Nazis that are coming to this infirmary that was across the street, I hear a knock on the door. Now, the apartment was a railroad flat, straight on. But if you walked in the front door and you made a U-turn, there was a bathroom there. And if you stood at my height at that time on the toilet seat, there was a slotted window. You could see who's at the front door. So I ran to the bathroom. Guess what? It's my father. And he's with another man, and the man reaches back in his pocket, takes out his handkerchief, and wipes his brow, and I see a gun. I never saw this guy in my life before. I was a pretty obedient kid. Ask my wife, I'm not that obedient today, but I was a pretty obedient kid. So I was told, even if it's your father, you don't open the door, and I didn't. Don't ask me if it was 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour. I don't know. I didn't tell time. I didn't have a watch. Who was the first person to walk up the stairs? Mama Franskevich. And she lets them in. My father says to me, why didn't you let me in? And I told him, and he understood. Well, the story has a very sad ending, because my father had escaped from the Vilna Ghetto, leaving my mother, and they made a pact. They said, one of us has to survive. You're not going to both survive if we stay in the ghetto, if both of us stay in the ghetto, and we can only let one of us escape. And somehow he got out and left my mother, okay? And the first words out of my mouth were, where's mommy? And he told me, don't worry, everything's fine, she'll be with you soon. So now, the night ends, they leave in the morning, and the story has a very sad ending. The guy that was with him was his best buddy since they were 5 years old. And they played soccer together, they were best men at each other's weddings and so on. They were heading back to their encampment in the forest, because my father joined the partisan group. They were heading back to their encampment, and they got caught up by a Nazi patrol, and they were running neck and neck, as my father told me, deeper into the woods, and his buddy got right behind my father, and the bullets headed for my father, caught his buddy, killed him immediately, and my father looked back and saw he couldn't help him, and he kept on going. My dad came to visit me another time, 1944, Christmas Eve, and guess what? He brought me a wooden pistol so I could put my finger away and not have to shoot with my finger anymore. But I asked him again, where's mommy? And he said, don't worry, she's fine. Fast forward 30 years, Dad and I are sitting around and having a little vodka, and I said, do you remember that time I asked you about mommy and where's mommy and why didn't you bring mommy with you? I said, what really was going through your mind? And he said, George, I didn't know how to tell you. As far as I was concerned, she was dead. Okay. My mother ultimately survived. 95% of the people were murdered in 1943 in the Vilna Ghetto. She was in the 5% that survived. And what made her survive were a couple of things. Number one, as sick as she was, or as much weight as she lost, she didn't look sick. And one of the reasons was her face. My mom, to the day she died, hardly didn't have a wrinkle. And she attested that to her mother rubbing cucumber on her face when she was a child, okay? And she said that's why her skin was that way, okay? I hope I got her skin a little bit, but anyway. So she survived, and the other reason she survived is she could sew. And they put her into another ghetto where there was a factory, and she was making garments for the Nazis. And that ultimately was a big help because she had a roof over her head, and in the wintertime, she didn't have to be out in the snow, and in the cold, she was in a building. And because she was in that factory, she also got an extra piece of bread and maybe an extra cup of not coffee, but hot water or something. So now the war ends, and as you know, General Eisenhower and his guys, they liberated most of the death camps. The Russians, who were friends at the time, so-called friends, liberated a lot of the ghettos. And my mother gets liberated by a bunch of Russians, and she's standing on a railroad platform going to get me, thinking my dad is dead, okay? And she's in rags, and she smells, and she's lost weight, and she's just in bad shape. Now, mind you, ladies, this is a story for ladies because my mother told me this. If she told it to me once, she told it to me 1,000 times. She was so proud of it. So she's standing on this platform, and she looks to her right, and she says, "Richard?" And he looks and says, "Lucy?" And the two of them recognize each other. It's like a scene from a Spielberg movie. He's in a Russian officer's uniform, highly polished boots, clean-shaven, and looking good. And they recognize each other, and they run towards each other, and they hug. And then my mother steps back and hauls off and smacks my father across the face. And he says, "What's the matter with you? Have you gone nuts? Have you gone crazy?" She says, "Look at you. How dare you look so good? How dare you smell so good?" And then they held each other and never let go. They came to the apartment. I don't have words for anybody here as to how I felt when I first saw them. We stayed there for about 3 weeks to get my mom's health back a little bit. We ended up in a displaced persons camp. My mother's best friend from the time she was 4 came with money, papers, got us out, went through Sweden into Brussels, stayed in Brussels until 1949, and came to the United States in 1949. And I vowed at that time that I would not have an accent except maybe a New York accent because we ended up in Brooklyn. And to tell the story, because I believe that somebody up there and somebody down here said, "You've got to tell the story because the story has to be told." There are too many non-believers in the world today. There are too many people that think it was a Spielberg myth or a Hollywood myth. I'm here to tell you it was no myth, and Spielberg had nothing to do with it except for be a great guy for what he's doing. So I want to thank you for the time, and I want to thank Jackie for allowing me to come up here, and also I want to have a big round of applause for Jackie and Carol Katz for creating this whole day. All right? So thank you very much.
Will the participants of our panel discussion please come on this stage and take a seat? The moderator of our panel discussion is Anat Granith. Anat has an MSW, a Master's in Social Work. Anat is employed with JFNCS in the Aviv Older Adults area, and she works with Holocaust survivors and children of survivors. Thank you, Anat. Most of all, she is my daughter-in-law.
Each of you had a unique upbringing due to your parents' experience during the Holocaust. So I hope through some of the questions and answers that you will share, we'll be able to give our audience a small glimpse into your unique upbringing and some of the experiences that you had as a child and as an adult. So let me start with, if each of you could state your name and also let us know which one of your parents was a survivor and from what country.
Jerry Penn, and my mother was a survivor from Lodz, Poland.
Eva Lippman, and both my parents, my mom and dad, were survivors from Ludmir, Poland.
Evelyn Feldman. I was born in a camp, and my parents are survivors.
Is this working? Okay. Judy Risner, and my mother was born in Czechoslovakia.
Lisa Gabrinsky, and my father is a survivor from Vilna, Poland.
Steve Spiegel, my father is from Fürth, Germany.
Karen Barron. Both of my parents are survivors, and they're here today. Liz and Henry Strauss, both from Germany.
I'm Wendy May, and both my parents were from Germany.
Thank you. Did your parents share their Holocaust story with you? If they did they share it with you as a child, as an adult? And also, did they just speak freely about it, or it was a one-time conversation that you had with them?
My mother did not discuss the Holocaust until I was a teenager, when she had to apply for getting money from Germany. You had to write your whole story, and I sat it and I got a D in typing, so this was really a chore. I had to sit at a Smith Corona typewriter and type up her story for the German government. And truly, if anyone asked me what I typed a couple years later, I could not tell you, other than the few stories she told over time. And there is a book, and she didn't, the only time you heard her talk about it was when the group of survivors got together, and they would talk and even laugh. It was kind of a little different. But I think it was like a support group. But there was a book that was written by Daniel Goldhagen that came out, and she wrote an inscription, I have the book here, of why she didn't talk about it, and she told me what chapter her group of women were written about and everything. So she wasn't all that free with talking about, like, I don't know how she was tortured. I may have when I typed it, but I don't know now.
My father could not talk about it. He had nightmares because he lost his first wife and child. And I still remember my mom telling me that, so it's kind of hard. My mother didn't talk about it for a long time, but then when I was an older adult, she really talked about it. And now she's 94 years old and cannot stop talking about it. I'm learning so much. She resents that all this happened to her and to her family, but she was a true survivor and a hero. She saved just about all of her family. And she was a young teenager, 15, 14 when she started. So I hope that I have her survivor skills if I ever need them, but she is my hero.
My parents rarely talked about it. Just if something in the community came up, they would. Okay. They would briefly mention something, being born in the camp, and my father was in 7 different camps throughout his life. They rarely talked about it. When my father turned 90, Terry said to him, I think you need to tell us your story. So he wrote briefly, 15 pages, his life story from the time he left Germany to the various camps he was in, where he was captured, and how he ended up in Camp Westerbork, where I was born and where he met my mother.
Well, my mother's parents were both killed in Auschwitz. 2 of her brothers survived camps, and one of them survived in hiding. But my mother spent the war in England, first in the countryside and then in London. And when she came to America, she married an American and never looked back. She never once talked about the Holocaust. I learned about it from my uncles and aunt.
So my experience is a little bit similar, but also different in the sense that my father never talked about it, but before he died, he wrote his memoirs in like 8 spiral binders, which my mother then had to type up. Fortunately, I didn't have to do it. So we had a lot of the story in great detail, but I'm still finding out more about the experiences of his brothers and other family members who had gone to Israel from Europe during the war.
My dad was actually, I think, as we got older, pretty open about it. He was never in a camp, but he lived through separating from his parents because he had to stay at a Jewish old age home to work. He told stories of his sneaking out at night to buy food on the black market, to bring back from farmers to the old age home where he was living. He told stories of their eventual travel from Germany to Lisbon, Portugal in 1941 and arriving here in the United States. He told us the story of Julius Streicher, who was actually prosecuted by an uncle of ours who then disappeared to the Nazis. So my dad was pretty open about it, and he also recorded his story with the Shoah Foundation. He was very comfortable telling the story to our children as well. My only regret is that he did not want to have a thing to do with teaching us German, and I would have loved to have been bilingual, but I understood his point of view of not wanting to teach us. So, but he was very open about telling the story.
Very similar. My parents never taught us a second language. I can understand German because they spoke it at home, but never wanted to teach us that. I think unlike most others, they talked about it a lot. Ever since I was very little, we lived it. Couldn't buy anything German. They talked about, my father talked about his family. He talked about, he got one of the last boats out to South Africa and lived there 10 years and would talk about jumping. I'll never forget going through paths and jumping over snakes and swamps to get to school, and we would complain about walking to school in the rain. We definitely heard those stories over and over. But they talked about it a lot since we were very little. I tried to do that with my kids, and I'm not sure it had the same impact. So I think we'll talk about that later because that's very concerning to me. But it was all throughout our childhood. We heard stories, we heard about our family, we heard about the anger, a lot of anger. You know, sometimes it was just such despair, and other times it was a lot of anger.
As you were growing up, do you think that your parents' parenting style was different in comparison to your peers whose parents were not survivors? And if so, in what ways? And also, when do you think you realized it?
I'll start by saying that I think it was a little different. I know that we were special in a way that my parents were always, and I know you're going to correct me, you always have, so if I say something wrong, you tell me. They were very frugal. My father worked, both parents, till very recently retired, and both worked really, really hard and very frugal. They saved everything. They had lost everything a number of times, so I don't care how successful my father became, we live frugally. They still do. They'd give you the shirt off their back, and no telling how much they've saved for their children. It's all about saving and being prepared. I think they lived in that fear, and I was aware of that all the time.
I'm not sure I recognized it as much as my brothers, who are here today as well, pointed out to me just a few minutes ago before I got up here, that my father seemed to worry a lot when we were not at home late at night, particularly when we were teenagers and out. I think he would have been much happier in the present with the iPhones, where he could track us down at any time, but that wasn't the case back when we were teenagers. So I think he always worried about somebody not coming home, and so I think that was one way his parenting style reflected. He always wanted to know where we were, when we would be back, all those kinds of things.
I don't know that the Holocaust experience influenced the parenting style as much as just being from Eastern Europe and growing up in a generation that was much earlier. So our household rules were much different from our peers, but there was that sense of fear about, well, it could all be taken away in a minute, and you should be really cautious about what you're doing.
I don't know if I had any of that, because all my friends' parents were a little unusual, so I didn't really notice if there's any difference as a child, But, I mean, as an adult, when I became a mother, I came to the conclusion probably that because my mother had stuffed everything, it did affect her ability to parent. Because she had stuffed so many emotions, she was kind of cut off and shut down in some ways.
I was pretty much aware of it because my parents, being immigrants, they both had very strong German accents. And growing up in Florida in a small Jewish community, I was almost as a child embarrassed by it because no one else had this. I also had the same situation with them being extremely frugal because they came here with nothing. And when my dad passed away, I found a little box that had Krugerrands, a lot of Krugerrands in them. Did not know they even existed. They were tucked away just in case, just for safety.
Well, I remember that I never felt like I missed out on anything. My mother always made 3 great meals every day. The clothes were always ironed. We had help in the house every so often, but my mom did a lot of it. And she was very strict. Made sure I had 3 glasses of milk every day, and if I fell asleep before that 3rd glass was served, I was awakened to drink that 3rd glass of milk. But we had everything that we needed, and we were happy, but they were stricter, and they wanted us to get our education and to always talk to us about, making something out of ourselves. And that didn't come out correctly, but they were just always wanting us to better ourselves, and they worked so hard, and we didn't think about it. Like Evelyn said, we were from the same town. The accent, it did embarrass me some, but I got used to it, but it was different, and I feel like I had a really good life, but we never talked about anything. Everybody was so busy doing their thing, but you did notice different things and felt a little different, so I have to say that.
I did not feel any different because we had no conversations among my friends about our parents. So really, I didn't know that my upbringing, my father met my mom, he was an American GI. I didn't know until I attended a couple of common threads that the Jewish Family and Career Services sponsors. And I was hearing some of the other children of survivors talk, and I went, you too? I mean, I had no idea that we had so many similarities. The only thing I will say, because someone brought it up, was my parents were very overprotective, but not as much with my brother, who's 11 years younger than I am. He got to do things that I was never allowed to do, so I guess they became a little more liberal as time went on.
My husband for support in case I start crying again. I think we were very lucky as far as Holocaust parents, as far as they were very positive. Of course, education was really important. And I think there was always a sense, they never said it, of cutoff. So I could see myself getting an education, going to college, but what did life look after that?
I was really fortunate to get to know both of Wendy's parents. They both since recently passed, but we did talk a little bit about, when they were growing up. They both came from Germany. Her father was from Nuremberg, and her mom came from Bad Kreuznach. Her father, her mom's family actually was one of the last families to get out, but they did experience Kristallnacht and some pretty harrowing experiences. Her father ended up, he was 12 going into the Holocaust, but he was tall for his age. So he was able to get assigned to work camps and ended up spending the entire war in a number of work camps. And he had some pretty amazing stories as well. And also was interviewed for Spielberg's Survivors of the Shoah. He was more open in talking about it when Wendy was growing up, and later he actually did talks at local schools, but her mom could never really speak about it. And it really wasn't until later in her life that her way of expressing was actually in writing. And it turns out she was quite a skilled writer, and she was fairly prolific in writing about her experiences, and fortunately we've got documentation of that. But when they were growing up, they weren't allowed to talk about, they weren't allowed to say the word hate at all. And even, when you talked about that you disliked something, that was allowed, but nothing much more extreme than that. The one thing that I think is very emotional for Wendy, among others, was when her father, Arno, lost his entire family. And he was with his parents and his little brother, and he was able to get selected for this work camp, and they were parting ways. The parents said to him, "If we live, we'll live for you, and if you live for us." And we've always taken that with us.
George shared with us that he feels an obligation and a commitment to continue to tell his story and the story of your parents. I know some of you know more about your parents' story, some of you know less. Do you feel an obligation to continue to tell their story and to keep their experience alive, especially those who have passed away?
Absolutely. It's so important to keep sharing. I was just sharing that at the Jewish Films Festival. I'm noticing that no one is younger than me. They're my age or older. It's very concerning to me. I get during the day, we're not going to see the younger, but I'm not seeing them at night. I know my own kids have a lot of feeling about it. I talk about it a lot. I probably don't talk about it as much as my parents, who did a lot. I wanted to. I have some regret if I didn't. They feel it, they know it, but do they have that same intensity that I do? I'm not sure. And I'm concerned that it'll get less and less. So I do feel this need to do what you're doing today. Thank you very much for this opportunity, and we need to keep this going everywhere, always. And whatever we can do to involve the youth, and it's wonderful to see a table over here with the youth, to have that same impact on the younger is it can't happen again. It can't happen again, and it could happen again. Excuse me? The Bremen, my father was interviewed by the Bremen. His story is there, and absolutely, the Bremen, there's...
I certainly believe that the story needs to continue to be told, and what I'm discovering is that the story is, I'm being asked about the story more often. And I don't know if it's the divisiveness of our political times, the rise of anti-Semitism, but in the environment that I work in, and just people do want to know, and I think it's important just to be open about it. So I'm always surprised when I get asked about it.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that we've tried to do is to make sure that our kids really knew this story. And it was, we were able several years ago to take them actually to a small town where my uncle was hidden during the war. And they met, the daughter of the man who had hid him. And that really made a lasting impression on them. So it was sort of bringing it into their sense of self, that this is who you are, this is part of who you are and who your family is, so that they feel more free about sharing that with their peers and really continuing to let people know about the story.
Well, I think I'm just terrified to think that it would not be remembered. I mean, that never forget is very, very important to me. Not my mother's story, because I didn't know her personal story, but the Holocaust itself and the deniers and all the atrocities, that could happen again. So I think it's very, very important. In 2016, I organized an event, a walk of remembrance in the city of Roswell. The mayor made a proclamation of Holocaust Remembrance Day. It was in May of 2016. And then we had an event similar to this event where I invited all the synagogues and churches in North Fulton to attend. And I worked in conjunction with the Georgia Commission on the Holocaust and invited Helen Fromowitz Weingarten, who you might know, to be our honored Holocaust survivor, to tell her story. And it was wonderful to get that out. It meant a lot to me to be able to do that. I'd like to do that again. And then there was a video made of it that will go to schools so that children can hear her story as well.
I've never ever told my story before because I never thought it was my story to tell. I thought it was my parents' story to tell. But obviously, as I'm getting older, my children know, and I am becoming a little more vocal about it and sharing my history, but it absolutely needs to continue to be told.
Well, my parents' story is actually at the Jewish Studies Center at the College of Charleston. It's called The Holocaust Quilt. And my niece actually interviewed my mom, talked to her for a long time, along with my sister, my sister is at Charleston and my niece is in Maryland. And so she wrote this, and it's a really beautiful, well-done story. tells from the very beginning when my mom was 14 and my father, he was 11 years older than her, how their story went all the way from the beginning until I was born. And I was born in a displaced persons camp in Eschwege near Berlin, and I just found out the name was Schlachtensee. And I didn't know this for a long time about the name and all this stuff, so I have pictures I've been looking up. But anyway, it's a beautiful story, and I do want to keep telling it, and my children know it, and they tell others as well. So we have to do this.
I didn't really know that much about my mother's story in detail, but my high school buddy who lived in Florida's daughter had a project for her confirmation, and she's now a cantor in New Hampshire, Shira Silverman, and she wanted to interview my mom, and this was before Steven Spielberg's organization interviewed her, and my mom was like on a balcony, so none of us could hear what she was saying, and you could see her hands nonstop. She was very nervous about it. And Shira lost the cassette, but she gave me the whole transcript of it. And so my kids will get that. My mom did talk. I mean, my kids are very well aware of what she went through, but not in detail. And my father did a very nice thing. I brought with me, if anyone wants to look at it. This shows my mother's whole path from Lodz to Auschwitz to she was in 3 concentration camps, to Greenberg, to Helmbrecht, and then she was liberated in Volari, which was Czechoslovakia, but is now Slovakia. And the whole thing, the whole path is outlined, and if you see how far they walked, or some of it was train, I mean, it's amazing. But my kids will inherit and have the book, the inscribed book. She bought 2 copies of the book, and they'll have the interview. I can't watch the Steven Spielberg tape yet. My mom died 5.5 years ago, and I still can't watch it.
I think I have a daughter in college, and I still have we have a son in high school. And with the Jewish kids, I think it's easier to pass on the story. I mean, I think they know it's part of their the culture, the heritage, what went on. What my concern is with the other teenagers and older but young kids that, you look around the world and you say, well, there are all these atrocities going on. And so you say, well, yes, that was an atrocity, but is that atrocity worse than what this atrocity is? So it doesn't get the attention necessarily. So that's my concern for the future, is that we're saying, yes, keep it alive, but how do you say to somebody, well, there's atrocities going on right now in other countries, and what are we doing about that? So what makes that any different than what already occurred? Right, more impactful, right. So again, that's a question we all have to kind of figure out, is they need to know that this was the Jewish people, and that is just as important as some of the other things going on, but where does it fit? That's my concern for the next generation.
Thank you very much. Is there anything else any of you want to add or share, or something that came up?
I think it's important it's very interesting to me to talk. I found out my group of friends right now who all live in Atlanta, out of, I think, 4 families, all of us, I think the husbands, and then myself, we all have a parent that was a survivor. So I always say there's got to be something that drew us value-wise together. So I think it's always good for survivors to know that there are values we all have, and that brings us together.
So one thing that I was thinking of as you asked about, how we get people to remember this, well, we're looking at our own community. We're looking at the United States, and we have this perspective because we've had au pairs from other countries taking care of our kids for years. And we've had au pairs from Czech Republic, from Russia, from Poland, and these are girls who are in their 20s, know nothing about the Holocaust. I mean nothing. And they're lovely girls. They could care less that we're Jewish. They've never even met a Jewish person. They have no idea what that is. But my big concern is you know, within our schools, even within the public high schools, they do at least mention this, and there's no mention of it outside of our country.
First of all, I challenge anybody in this room that is a survivor or a child of a survivor that you come to the Bremen, you register, and you try to tell your story. Survivors are dying off every second as we speak. There aren't many of us left, and the ones that are left, some of us are not well enough to get in front of a crowd and speak. We have this problem at the Bremen. We have it at the Commission as well as the Georgia Commission. And as far as teaching it in schools, it is being taught in some of the schools. The problem with it being taught in the schools right now is the fact that it's being taught to the fifth graders. And the fifth graders are too young to really absorb and to understand what went on. So it should be taught from the seventh grade up as far as I'm concerned, and that's only my personal opinion. One of the schools, one of the universities up north, okay, they're having a conference of gifted teachers teaching the Holocaust. And it's next month, it's the 5th and 6th of next month, and I'm going to be speaking there. But so it is being taught, and it's called the Suitcase Project. And I did a thing at Moultrie. Believe it or not, we spoke at Moultrie for this Suitcase Project, and there were 550 kids there, and there was an exhibit, and these were non-Jewish kids, and they all did it. And there's one of the best examples that I can give you is Brandon Murphy, who's a teacher at the Marist Catholic School, and he teaches the Holocaust, and he takes kids every year to Auschwitz. I'm going to be speaking for him next week. So at any rate, I'm just blabbering, just going on right now, but anybody in this room, come to me, and I'll be glad to put you in touch with the right people, because we need speakers and we need docents.
Thank you very much. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you for speaking so honestly about your upbringing, about the future. Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, for being here today.
This is called At My Bar Mitzvah, dedicated to the memory of a 13-year-old hero of the resistance by Howard Kahn.
When I was 13, I became a bar mitzvah.
When I was 13, he became a bar mitzvah.
When I was 13, my teacher taught me to wear tefillin.
When he was 13, his teacher taught me to throw grenades.
When I was 13, I studied the pathways of Torah and Talmud.
When he was 13, he learned the canals of Warsaw and the sewers of the ghetto.
At my bar mitzvah, I took an oath to live as a Jew.
At his bar mitzvah, he took an oath to die as a Jew.
At my bar mitzvah, I blessed God.
At his bar mitzvah, he questioned God.
At my bar mitzvah, I lifted my voice in song.
At his bar mitzvah, he lifted his fists and fought.
At my bar mitzvah, I read from the scroll of the Torah.
At his bar mitzvah, he ran through a wall of fire.
At my bar mitzvah, I wore a talit over a new suit.
At his bar mitzvah, he wore a rifle and bullets over rags.
At my bar mitzvah, I praised my voice with song.
At his bar mitzvah, they praised his strength and courage.
When I was 13, I was called up to the Torah. I went to the Bima.
When he was 13, his body went up in smoke. His soul rose to God.
When I was 13, I became a bar mitzvah and lived.
When he was 13, he became bar mitzvah and now lives within each one of us.
Thank you.